Hi guys, my name is Esther from Allison Tutors, and today I'm going to be taking you through economics, particularly inflation. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, I'm going to go through the definition of inflation, the types and characteristics of inflation, the causes and consequences of inflation, the inflation problem in South Africa, as well as measures to combat inflation. I'm also going to put a link the link to our blog. So in the blog, I basically compiled past paper related questions that cover inflation. Now let us start with the definition. What exactly is inflation? Inflation is basically an increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. So when we think about the prices of goods and services rising over a stipulated time period, that's basically your inflation, right? For you to actually get a better understanding of this, in 2003, the price of bread was pegged at 3 rand 56 cents. Quite unbelievable, but yes. But currently, bread on average is 14 rand 50 cents. So this basically shows you the effects of inflation. You realize that when the general price level rises, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. This is what we refer to as a reduction in the purchasing power of money in economic terms. So that's basically the definition of inflation. Let us now proceed to the types and characteristics of inflation. I'm going to talk about demand pull inflation. So, demand pull inflation is a rise in the price of a product or service that is normally caused by an increase in demand and a shortage in supply. So, this is basically the definition, right? I would actually advise someone to try be as accurate as possible to basically write the definition as it is given in textbooks or whatever material you are using. Okay, so the logical explanation to this is too much pressure being put on the available commodities, right? So basically, there has been an increase in demand, is depicted by this graph. However, the supply has remained constant. So basically, that's going to create a shortage, and then the prices of goods and services are going to increase. Now, as we can see according to this graph, right, the aggregate demand is basically shifted to the right. So there's been an increase in the aggregate demand from AD1 to AD2. However, the long run aggregate supply curve has remained constant. We can also see that the price has increased from P1 to P2 as well as the real GDP. However, this is not good for the economy. Now, you need to know the characteristics of demand pull inflation. To start with, there's a relative increase in total demand. This has actually been shown in the diagram above. Foreigners contribute to demand pull inflation because they demand imported goods, and this demand puts greater strain on limited supply, thereby increasing prices. For me to drive this example home, I'll give an example of South Africa. South Africa provides most countries in the southern region with a lot of commodities, right? That's why you see people from Zambia, people from Zimbabwe, people from Mozambique, they come and purchase various commodities in South Africa. Now, what does this mean? It actually puts a strain on the supply, right? And therefore, prices are going to increase, right? Now, if demand of goods rises more rapidly than supply, a shortage will arise and the prices will rise to match inflation. This is basically what I've been talking about. Now, a good example of demand pull inflation is aggregate demand rising at 4%, but the productive capacity is at 2.5%. Hence, firms will see demand outstripping supply. Therefore, they respond by increasing prices. This is basically what we've been talking about. Now, cost push inflation occurs when we experience rising prices due to higher cost of production and higher costs of raw materials. Cost push inflation is determined by supply side factors such as higher wages and oil prices. Cost push inflation can lead to lower economic growth and often causes a fall in living standards, though it proves to be temporary. Now, every time when we think about an increase in the price of inputs, right? Therefore, we should just think about the cost push inflation. So basically, let's say if the cost of the raw materials that we're using for production increases, therefore it will contribute to cost push inflation. If the cost of the if the labor cost increases, it's also going to contribute to cost push inflation. Now let us have a look at the diagram. As you can see on the diagram, right, the short run aggregate supply curve or the supply curve is basically shifted to the left. meaning to say that due to higher costs of raw materials and labor, the supply has contracted or it has reduced, right? And then this has also led to an increase in the price. As you can see, P1 has increased to P2. Also, the real GDP has reduced. Now, you should also be able to identify the characteristics of cost push inflation. What are the characteristics? An increase in the total cost of production on the supply side of the market, right? An increase in labor cost is added to the cost of production and therefore causes cost push inflation. So, currently, due to a rise in the cost of living, a lot of people have been advocating for an increase in wages and salaries. What does this mean to the prices of our goods and services? It means they are going to increase, right? Because the cost of production has also increased. Now, the next point is an increase in taxes such as value added tax would lead to cost push inflation. On 1 April 2018, South Africa's VAT increased from 14% to 15%. This led to an increase in prices. Now, if you have a look, if you buy anything, if you take a look at the bottom of the receipt, there's something called VAT 15%, right? Now, an increase in that VAT, so an increase in the VAT is basically caused by the government. It's like a government policy or something. So if the VAT increases, this means to say that the prices of goods and services are also going to increase. Now, the next point is more expensive imported products, especially intermediate goods, add to the price of finished goods on the supply side, and this aids to cost push inflation. For example, South Africa imports rubber, paper, etc. Hence, depreciation of the rand will make these commodities more expensive. Now, remember sometime last year when the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, right? Now, what happened was the price of oil became more expensive, right? This actually led to an increase in the prices of things like your cooking oil, right? So, if the products that we import, if they increase in the price, it means to say that the final products that we are making here with those commodities, they are also supposed to increase. Let us have a look at consumer inflation. You need to be able to identify the following types of consumer inflation. By the way, you're not really supposed to know how to define them, at least just be able to state them. We have headline inflation, we've got CPIX inflation, core inflation, administered prices inflation. Let us have a look at producer inflation. So, producer inflation measures the average change over time in prices domestic producers receive for their output, right? So, basically, let me give you an example. So, let's say, for instance, you are a producer of wheat, right? Then in February, you were charging 100 Rand per kg. So, meaning to say that if you sold maybe 10 kgs, you got 1,000 Rand. Then in March, you are now charging 102 Rand per kg, meaning to say you are now getting 10,200 Rand. So basically, that's producer inflation. Now, let us have a look at all inclusive inflation. All inclusive inflation is a measure which is used to check inflation rate for all final goods and services produced in a particular year. I think this is quite self explanatory. We can now have a look at hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is a very rapid increase in price level at a very high inflation rate, which causes money to become worthless. This is a very good example of what happened in Zimbabwe during the 2008 era, right? So basically, let's say in the morning, imagine in the morning you had 15 Rand, you could buy bread with 15 Rand. Then in the evening, you can not even buy a sweet. That is basically what was happening under hyperinflation. Now let us have a look at stagflation. Stagflation is a condition where there is low economic growth, a high unemployment rate, and high rates of inflation, right? That's basically stagflation. Now, deflation is a decrease in the general price level in the economy. This can actually be influenced by an appreciation in the economy. So, appreciation of the currency, sorry. So, appreciation of the currency is an increase in the value of one currency in relation to another currency, right? So, that will actually cause deflation. Now, let us have a look at causes and consequences of inflation. We're going to start by the causes of demand pull inflation. Causes of demand pull inflation are an increase in consumption. So, now during economic growth, there is usually an increase in spending or consumption. This is caused by an easy access to credit and also reduction in taxes. So the downsides of this include the creation of debts, lack of savings, and a rise in inflation. Now, when a country is undergoing an economic growth, right, there's usually an increase in consumption. Why? Because there is more disposable income. What causes the disposable income is due to easy access to credit. So the bank can easily give people loans, or basically the interest rates are quite low. Right, and also there's a reduction in taxes. However, the downsides or the disadvantage of this is it creates debts, and people actually sink in debts, and also there's a lack of saving, right? So these are the causes of demand pull inflation. Another cause is lower interest rates and increased investment spending. A reduction in interest rates will encourage firms to expand their operation. When this happens, there is an increase in the supply of goods, and demand simultaneously increases as well. When aggregate demand increases at a faster rate in comparison to supply, then the prices increases, right? Now, let's say, for instance, the repo rate at which the bank lends money reduces. What does it mean? It means more people are going to borrow money from the banks so that at least they can maybe open companies or expand their operation. So, this actually means to say we're going to have an increase in the supply of goods, and then demand also simultaneously increases, meaning to say the price will also increase, right? That's actually a cause of your demand pull inflation. Now, we also have government spending. An increase in government spending without an increase in productivity leads to inflation. The government can increase its spending in the following ways: social grants, infrastructure, consumption, spending. Now, if the government is to increase the social grants of people, however, there is not any increase in productivity, this is actually going to lead to inflation. There was a time when Julius Malema was advocating for an increase in social grants. So he was saying 350 Rand is not enough, right? People need to get maybe 850 Rand or 950 Rand. This would have been good, but however, this increase of 500 Rand per person, how is the government going to get this 500 Rand per person? Is it going to increase its productivity? What is it going to do? If not, it will only lead to inflation, right? Now, let us have a look at the causes of cost push inflation. So, the causes of cost push inflation are higher wages. Wages are one of the main costs that firms face. Rising wages will push up prices, and as firms have to pay higher costs, hence firms counter this under cost of production, meaning that the final product price increases. So currently, due to an increase in the cost of living, many people have been asking for, or many unions have actually been protesting and advocating for increases in wages, right? Now, if wages increases, it means to say that firms are also going to increase their product prices. Why? Because they also need to counter the cost of production, right? So you realize that in South Africa, for most firms, right, most for other firms, if they actually want to run away from increasing the minimum wage or giving people enough wages, they actually hire illegal immigrants because they are cheaper to hire, right? Now let us have a look at higher taxes. So under higher taxes, we have got higher VAT and excess duties, and these will increase the prices of goods. Higher VAT is usually imposed so as to discourage the consumption of certain commodities like your alcohol, commodities like your cigarettes, right? We also have imported inflation. Under imported inflation, a depreciation of a currency will increase the domestic prices of imports. Previously, we did mention that South Africa imports rubber. Hence, if the rand depreciates, it is more expensive to import rubber, making the final products expensive. Now, under imported inflation, for you to actually be able to understand this, South Africa imports things like rubber and oil. If the price of rubber that they are importing increases, it means to say the price of the final products, like your ties um, and other related products that are made from rubber, they are also going to increase, right? We also have an increase in the producer's profit margin, may be added to the selling price and contribute to inflation. I think this is quite self explanatory. So let us assume that the producer was making a profit 100,000 Rand per year, but then right now they need to increase their profit to 120,000. Means to say they're just going to increase their prices. Now let us have a look at an increase in money supply. An increase in the quantity of money in circulation without an increase in the supply of goods or services can lead to inflation, right? Um, so when you first started doing commerce, right, I'm sure one of the characteristics of money where money is scarce. Now, if there's a ridiculous increase in the printing or in the supply of money, it means to say that we're going to have high inflation. Because in most cases, we actually won't be having any functional industries to supplement this. So this was the case that actually happened in Zimbabwe during 2008. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe as a whole, it had a lot of debts, right? So it started printing up large sums of money, but then it didn't have any functional industries, and this just led to hyperinflation. And the inflation actually reached a point of around 4.5 trillion percent. Quite unbelievable, but yes, it actually did happen. Now let us have a look at the harmful effects that inflation can have. Inflation affects the distribution of income and wealth, right? But it has a regressive effect on lower income families and older people in the society, right? Now, let us assume that someone is earning 5,000 Rand per month, right? And then maybe a bag of millimil increases from 100 Rand to 300 Rand. This is actually going to be a lot for this person, this 200 Rand increase, right? By the way, this is just an assumption. However, if someone is earning something like 100,000 and then there's an increase of a particular commodity by 100 Rand, right? This is actually going to be quite insignificant. So it means inflation is going to have regressive effect on lower income families. Now, we also have falling real incomes. Now, with millions of people facing a cut in their wages or at best a pay rise, rising inflation will lead to a fall in real incomes. Now, if someone was earning 20,000 Rand in 2003, it was way more than enough, right? But right now, if someone is earning 20,000 Rand in 2023, well, it's at least comfortable, but it's not like so much. You understand, compared to how much it was back in the day. So this is basically going to be the effect of falling real incomes, or basically a reduction in the purchasing power of money. Let us go on to the next point that talks about the cost of borrowing. So, high inflation may also lead to high borrowing costs for businesses and people needing loans and mortgages as financial markets protect themselves against higher prices, and also increase the cost of borrowing on short and long term debt. There is also pressure on the government to increase the value of state pension and unemployment benefits, as well as your welfare payments. So basically, if a country is having a high inflation, it means to say it's going to be very expensive for someone to get a loan or a mortgage from the bank, meaning to say there's going to be a reduction in investments within the economy, right? Therefore, there's going to be low economic growth. At the same time, right, there's also going to be increased pressure on the government to increase their unemployment benefits as well as the welfare payments. And in most cases, they won't be having any productivity to actually compensate for this increase. Now, we also talk about business uncertainty. High and volatile inflation is not good for business confidence, partly because they can't be sure of what their costs and prices are likely to be. Okay, so you find out that investors in countries like Zimbabwe are not favored by investors. Why? Because inflation is very high, and then the business environment is very volatile and uncertain. And usually, investors they don't want to invest their money in such types of business environments. Okay, so these are basically the effects of inflation. I'm going to proceed with the inflation problems as well as measures to combat inflation in the next video. Thank you so much for watching this video and enjoy the rest of your day.